Hi, welcome to Melissa's Money Mindset. Being a landlord or a property manager certainly isn't easy. My husband and I bought our first investment property about 4 years ago, and we've continued to build our portfolio ever since. Now, I self-manage our properties, and so today I wanted to share 12 things that I've learned over the years so that whether you're thinking about dipping your toes into the world of real estate or property management, whether you're self-managing your properties like me, or whether you're working alongside an existing property management team, you feel like you have the tools you need to set yourself up for success, handle problems as they come up, and hopefully make your life a little bit easier. But before we get into that, if you could please do me a huge favor and like this video, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you never miss another money-making tip. Let's get right into it. Tip number 1, choose your tenants wisely. Now, if you've been in real estate or you've been in property management for a while now, I'm sure you have your own nightmare tenant story, and so let me tell you ours. So our nightmare tenant story comes from 2022 when we bought our first duplex. And so, of course, when you buy a property, you're inheriting the tenants that come along with it. You have to honor the lease that's already in place. Now, obviously, we weren't able to vet this tenant or anything. We just had to accept the lease for what it was, at least until the lease was up. So this property had been wildly mismanaged. The previous owner didn't even make sure that tenants paid rent. I think that she had just come into some money and she thought that it would be a smart idea to buy a duplex and then apparently not manage it at all. So I was basically inheriting a nightmare situation and a nightmare tenant. So this tenant was also, including everybody else in the unit, smoking cigarettes at all times of the day. I mean, it was just like coating the walls. And also smoking marijuana, which even though it's legal in the state of Colorado, you can't smoke marijuana or use marijuana products if it's against the terms of the lease. So he was in violation of the lease in multiple ways. So of course we had to get our attorney involved. We gave him notices to quit and those were all ignored. So eventually we started the eviction process. We eventually got him out, but unfortunately damage had already been done. Of course, the entire place reeked of smoke. Both sides of the duplex reeked of smoke. It cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to basically tear the entire building down to studs, rebuild everything, and also remove all the insulation from the attic and re-insulate everything. That was quite a costly tenant for us. He also, on the way out, as one last FU, ground up one of those orange plant potters and he stuffed it down the toilet, basically clogging up the entire sewer system and plumbing system on that side of the duplex. So of course I had to bring in a team of plumbers to clear that all out and then re-scope everything to make sure the plumbing in the house was actually usable. So that was our actual nightmare tenant. So as I stated before, I'm so careful about which tenants I choose to rent our properties because it's not easy to get rid of tenants. Yes, in theory, you think you can just evict somebody, but it takes months and months and months and a lot of attorney fees. So now, moving forward, I am very picky about what tenants we choose. I personally use Zillow Rental Manager for listing all of our properties for rent. And then that's super nice because tenants can just go on there, apply, and they'll do a credit check. So I don't accept anybody unless they have a minimum credit score of at least 700. It checks their income. So we can require at least 2 times monthly rent for income. And it also allows you to do a background check so that you can check to see if there's any criminal activity or criminal history, if they're a felon or if they have any misdemeanors or anything like that, so that you know exactly the kind of people that would be living in your unit. Now, in addition to those things, I also call their previous or their current landlord just to see, did they pay their rent on time? Were they a troublesome tenant? Is it worth me renting to them? And I also call their place of employment just to confirm that they're actually employed there. Now, when I'm touring people around a property, I also, and this is going to sound kind of strange, I let them go first so that I can kind of walk behind them. You can always tell if somebody is a smoker. Usually their clothes smell of smoke or just their breath smells of smoke, and you can smell that as they're walking past you. So I definitely pay attention to that. You can definitely smell marijuana too. And I also look at how their car is because usually people treat their cars how they would treat their housing. So if their car is just packed to the brim with crap, Probably not our ideal tenant. That's exactly how they would treat our rental unit. They would just pack it to the brim with crap. So I always pay attention to things like that. And I also just want to make sure that they're an enjoyable person to deal with. So granted, every home is probably going to have a problem, whether it's a minor problem or a major problem at some point. And so I want to be able to have a conversation with these people in a respectful way. So for example, I once was touring around a father who was probably in his mid-50s and his adult son. And the entire time, his adult son was just completely berating him and telling him what a terrible person he was and just being horrible to his father. And that guy was going to have to be on the lease. And I knew that I would just be buying myself a problem tenant. So even though they qualified in every other way and the dad was so sweet, I denied them because I don't want to buy myself another nightmare. All right, tip number 2 is to build yourself a reliable team. Now, I don't think when my husband and I started out in real estate 4 years ago, we knew that we would have to have a team of attorneys on retainer, but we actually have quite a few attorneys. So we have one that we meet with every year to update our lease, which I'll go over in just a little bit. So leases are always changing and evolving to help protect you. So that's very important. We have one that does eviction specifically. So like that helped us with that problem tenant that I mentioned before. We have one that works with litigation. So not all attorneys litigate. So that's something to double check. And then we also have one that helps us set up all of our businesses. And then finally, we have one that helps us with buying and selling real estate. Now, in addition, you probably will need things like a handyman, a reliable plumber, and probably some contractors at some point. Now, another point to make is to make sure that your contractors are bonded and insured, and make sure that you have a copy of their insurance just in case. I've known way too many people that have had contractors just take off with their money. So you want to make sure that if that happens or if something goes wrong with the project, that you can get your money back. Tip number 3 is to have a good lease. Now, I know that there's tons of leases available online. Don't use those. Pay the extra money that it costs to hire a quality attorney. They will write you a lease. I think our lease is probably 16 pages long now, which might seem like overkill, but a lease is basically what protects you and your property. So while you obviously want to provide a good place to live at the end of the day, and while I have a good relationship with our tenants and I'm just trying to provide good housing and make some money doing it, at the end of the day, it's a business and I need to protect myself. Now, we meet with our attorney each year that helps us update our lease. So for example, a huge bill that was just passed in Colorado is HB 24-1098. So that basically states that cause is required for the eviction of a residential tenant. So basically this means that if a tenant has been in your property for more than a year, more than 12 months, you basically have to renew their lease no matter what, unless you plan on moving into the property yourself, unless you plan on renovating the property, or unless you plan on making it a short-term rental, so turning it into an Airbnb or turning it into a VRBO. Otherwise, that tenant basically gets to stay in your property unless you can prove that they're violating the lease in some way. So that was a huge change to the Colorado law this year and was a big section that was added to our lease. Other small things that were added this year were the cost of pet rent. So you can only charge, I believe it's $35 per pet. So it's just things that kind of seem minute like that, but you have to stay on top of these things. I also recommend being very familiar with your lease and also with landlord tenant laws in whatever state you live in. So you have to know what's happening in your units at all times. And it's also important to know your lease well enough so that you can understand when your tenants are in violation. Tip number 4 is to put it in writing. If you need to send your tenants a message, I highly recommend that you email them. So for any changes in rent, so I just sent out an email to all of our tenants saying that rent will be going up for next year and it'll be going up this amount. So that's considered a formal notice. If you also want to kind of CYA, cover your butt, you can mail them the same letter so that you know that they're going to receive it. A lot of people just text their tenants, which of course I text our tenants too, but if I'm giving them a formal notice, I make sure to send that via email or via snail mail. So depending on what state you live in, texting is actually not considered proof or a valid form of communication, and it probably wouldn't hold up in court. Tip number 5 is to keep your pulse on the rental market and know when to raise rents. So I know this can be kind of a hot topic for landlords and property owners alike. I've looked at so many properties over the years that are renting for under market rent by 25 to 50%, either because the tenants have been there for a long time, people don't want to have the conversation, they think it's awkward, they're afraid that their long-term tenants will leave. There can be any number of reasons, but don't let that deter you. At the end of the day, this is a business, so you should run it that way. So the cost of living, especially in Colorado and other desirable places, has gone up exponentially in the past few years. And that means that rent, unfortunately, has to go up. So it costs me more money to buy a property, to renovate a property, maintain that property, and it also costs me a lot more in property taxes. So unfortunately, rents will have to go up to cover those extra costs. To some people, it may seem uncomfortable to have these conversations. Of course, you don't want to come out guns blazing talking about how you're raising rent. But for me, it hasn't bothered me that much because I know that, one, I've bought the properties right. I haven't overpaid for them. Two, I've made them beautiful, so I know that they're worth what I'm asking for them. And I also maintain a good relationship with the tenants, and I'm reachable basically 24/7. So if something is wrong with the properties, I usually get it fixed next day. So because of all those things, I haven't had any pushback from any of our tenants. I'm talking about anywhere between a $50 and $200 rent increase year over year, and none of our tenants have given me any problems. Again, this is important because at the end of the day, the cost of living is going up, meaning that your bottom dollar or your cash flow on that property is being affected. And you need that cash flow to help you with capital improvements, just generally maintaining and upkeeping the property. Now, let's talk about when you go to sell your properties. So if you've been chronically under renting your properties, when you go to sell that property, it's only worth as much as it brings in. So you could probably just get a fraction of what you could have if you would have been renting it at market rates. Tip number 6 is to be a responsive landlord. So all of our tenants have my personal cell phone number. I've had multiple calls in the middle of the night saying, hey, the basement's flooding, we're running the washing machine and it's coming up in the basement drain, or this toilet's overflowing. So any emergencies like that, I take care of right away. That's just part of the job, right? That's just part of owning property, wanting to keep your properties nice, and wanting to keep good tenants in your properties. Tip number 7 is to stay up to date on preventative maintenance. So the first things that came to mind for me were cleaning your gutters and also making sure the grading that's near your house is going away from the property. So you want the water to naturally flow down and away from the property and not be pooling against your foundation and eventually ending up in your basement. Now, the other example that I can think of is changing your furnace filters. So we've just put new furnaces and new air conditioners in all of our units. And so I send furnace filters to all of our tenants once a year, all 12, so that they can change it every month. And I send them reminders to do so, because if your furnace is working really hard to try to push air through a dirty furnace filter, your furnace is going to burn out a lot faster. Tip number 8 is to keep a close eye on contractors. So I've worked with a number of contractors over the years, some good, some bad, some in the middle, and I highly encourage, again, that you make sure that they're bonded and insured. Make sure, again, that you have a copy of their insurance just in case anything goes wrong. And I honestly have just come to the realization that you kind of need to handhold people. I've been in enough situations where if I'm not around, for example, maybe a plumber tries to do something that's more of a quick fix and isn't a longer term fix, and then I end up paying the price down the road. So I stay there and I watch the people work. I ask questions. And I just try to kind of oversee what they're doing. Now, if you're doing a larger renovation, we've done those too, and you're hiring a renovation company, make sure that you have a written contract and a price before you start. Also, make sure that you have a start date and a finish date. So projects can often run long, but if you can put that in the contract and say you need to be done by this date, then that usually motivates people to work a little bit more quickly. Also, don't trust them to stay on budget, because at the end of the day, it's you writing them a check and not the other way around. They don't care how much it costs you to fix something or to renovate something. Just keep an eye on them. Again, it can kind of feel like hand-holding. It's quite annoying. That's kind of the running joke in our family, is that our next business is going to be a general contracting business, because it's so hard to find good, reliable, honest, hardworking contractors. Tip number 9 is remove barriers to paying rent on time. So again, we use Zillow Rental Manager, And they actually make this so easy. So when tenants are accepted, they can sign the lease through Zillow Rental Manager. And then they even have the option to set up auto payments so that rent is just pulled out of their bank account each month and they don't have to log in and manually pay. And I believe that they might also be reporting your tenant paying rent on time to the credit bureaus. So it kind of benefits your tenant as well, and that it helps them build credit. Tip number 10 is holding your tenants accountable. So again, I really like all of our tenants. Unfortunately, even though I like them, it is a business and I have to hold them accountable for their actions. So we've had one tenant that just does not mow their lawn. I bought them a lawnmower. I bought them gas for the lawnmower and they just continue not to mow. And I'm not joking when I go over there. The grass is probably 3 to 4 feet high. I mean, you can eventually get a violation from the city for not upkeeping your yard. So I have to continually give them violations. And even though they're just the sweetest people, they still need to be mowing their yard. We had another tenant who I went over there to turn the sprinkler system on and it smelled like marijuana in the unit. So I had to give her a marijuana violation. She was in violation of the lease. It says no marijuana use on the property. And of course she was saying, oh my gosh, it won't happen again. Oh, my niece was living with us and I didn't know. It doesn't matter. Even though I still really like her, she's so sweet. You got to be following the lease or there are consequences. Tip number 11, and I have this one in all caps, for the love of God, please keep your finances organized. So my husband and I, as I've said, have been trying to just pick up as many investment properties as we can. The majority of people can't put together a simple profit and loss or a T12 or a rent roll. I mean, it's just the most simple things that we're asking for. And it's honestly like pulling teeth. And so that's kind of why we eventually want to get into the commercial real estate space and out of the residential space, because people in commercial take this much more seriously. So whether you're doing this on a monthly basis, which I highly recommend, or a yearly basis when you get everything together for your accountant, make sure that you're keeping receipts. Make sure that you can put all of these simple things together. Again, you're running a business, so present yourself in a professional manner. And finally, tip number 12, make sure that you're doing a walkthrough of your properties. So even if you have long-term tenants that you love, I would recommend doing a 6-month or a 12-month walkthrough just to make sure that everything is okay. They're not destroying your unit. There isn't any water damage. And that's a great opportunity too to ask your tenant, is there anything that you think needs to be fixed? So those are 12 tips that I came up with to help you from one landlord and property owner to another. I hope that you found this helpful and beneficial in some way. As always, feel free to drop a comment below if you have any nightmare tenant stories. I would love to hear those. If you have any tips that you think that I missed, I'd be happy to include those in a future video. As always, feel free to follow me on my social channels right here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.